Well, as Israel considers its response to Iran's attack and continues to fight its war against Hamas in Gaza, there are fears over where these regional tensions could head. It's a complex part of the world with many rivals vying for influence. Israel's neighbor Jordan and regional heavyweight Saudi Arabia both appeared to help defend Israel from Iran's missiles, to the surprise of many, that was. Both countries are involved in a complicated balancing act, making it difficult to predict how they might behave in the future.
When the drones and missiles from Iran came flying towards Israel, many of them passed through Jordan's airspace. Not only did the Arab kingdom help shoot them down, it also opened its airspace to Israeli and US planes seeking to intercept them. Amman insists that was strictly to protect its own citizens. But Jordan's King Abdullah has to balance competing interests. Jordan is pro-Western and likes to keep in step with its allies, especially the United States. Plus, Jordan shares a long border with Israel and wants peaceful relations. Amman often works behind the scenes with the Israeli authorities. But Israel's war in Gaza has outraged many Jordanians. 1/5 of the population is of Palestinian descent, including King Abdullah's own wife. The government has vociferously condemned the war, but the kingdom's perceived defence of Israel in the face of Iranian missiles has angered many. Jordan's powerful neighbour Saudi Arabia also faces a difficult balancing act. The Sunni kingdom views Shiite Iran as its biggest regional rival, but last year it re-established relations with Tehran. Both the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates have sought to improve ties with Iran and Israel. Prior to Israel's intervention in Gaza, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman looked poised to sign a deal with the US, where the kingdom might have recognized Israel in return for security guarantees from Washington. But after 6 months of war in Gaza and tens of thousands of Palestinians dead, that's off the table for now. Still, Arab officials say both the Saudis and the Emirates shared intelligence with the Americans, warning that Iran was planning an attack on Israel. That probably allowed for a more successful defensive response by Israel and its allies. The challenge for Arab leaders is to keep the US on side while not endangering their delicate relationship with Iran, or being seen by their own people as supporting Israel at the expense of Palestinians in Gaza.
And for a closer look, we can now bring in Oraib Al Rantawi. He's the director of the Al-Quds Center for Political Studies, an independent think tank based in Amman in Jordan. Mr. Al Rantawi, welcome to DW. Now, Jordan and Saudi Arabia were involved in thwarting Iran's attack on Israel. Some Israeli media are now talking about a new military alliance against Iran. Is that what this is?
I don't think so. Let us turn back to the year 2021 when Biden first visited to the region, being president of the United States. He tried to make a network, regional network, between some Arab countries and Israel, anti-missiles, anti-drones, network, bringing together the radars, networks in several countries. This network was very active recently, and it brings a very rapid alert about the Iranian attack to Israel. But to move forward to a military alliance between Israel and some Arab state, I think it is still too far for different reasons. The war that Israeli continued in Gaza for more than 6 months now. Second, the lack of confidence with the United States and its leading role in the region. And the new rapprochement between the regional powers that was emerged in the last 3-4 years, especially between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Emirates, Iran. This will make it difficult for those countries to balance their stance, but I'm quite sure it is not easy to go for an offensive military alliance between Israel and those countries.
So what precisely do you think it was that led especially Jordan and Saudi Arabia to intervene?
I think from the Jordanian perspective, it was all about defending the country's sovereignty in the one hand. In the other hand, Jordan will not be happy to see Iran involved deeply in this struggle because this will pose a serious challenge for Jordan. Jordan and Iran maintain a very problematic relationship, especially in the last few years, based on the role of the Iranian proxies in the northern and eastern borders, the smuggling of weapons and drugs, and some statement by Iraqi militias and Iranian officials who threaten Jordan in a way or another. That's why I think, but that doesn't bring Jordan in the same basis with Israel, because Jordan also consider what's going on in Gaza and West Bank as an existential threat for its mere stability, security, national identity. This is really in the top of the discussion in the public debate in Jordan, especially in the last 7 months. Jordan fear from the forced migration of Palestinian, forced transfer of Palestinian. Jordan is very much feared from this statement by Israeli far-right politicians who consider Jordan as Eastern Palestine and consider Jordan is the Palestinian state. These are also an existential threat for the country. Jordan is trapped between, if I may say, and I quote here some officials, between two major troublemakers in our area, Israel and Tehran.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable position to be in. What sort of conversations do you expect to be taking place behind closed doors in the Arab world right now, not only in Jordan, as Israel mulls its options and considers how to respond to Iran's attack over the weekend?
Not to allow Netanyahu divert the attention from Gaza to somewhere else. This is the top priority, not allow Netanyahu to force Palestinians to deport them, especially from Gaza, to prevent by all means Rafah battle that is planned by the Israelis, to avoid this regional turmoil and sliding to a regional widespread war. This is a serious threat for those countries. Each country has its own calculus, and they want really to avoid such a horrible scenario for the whole region. Nobody will be winning in such a widespread confrontation on the regional level. Therefore, to calm down the situation is the top priority now, and to pressure Israel by American allies and European allies not to go far in their retaliation, because what we are quite sure about it, if Israel attack Iran again, because you should know that Israel started this conflict with Iran by attacking the Iranian embassy in Damascus. If the Israeli also retaliate to the Iranian attack, the Iranian will retaliate again. And this will be a vicious circle of violence. And I think the countries in the middle, which is Arab countries mainly, will pay a very heavy price. This is the top priority to avoid such crazy scenario.
Yeah. We just have to be specific here. Israel has, of course, not claimed responsibility for the attack on the diplomatic compound in Syria. That was Oraib Al Rantawi of the Al-Quds Center for Political Studies in Jordan. Thank you so much for all those insights.
Thank you.
And for some analysis, I'd like to welcome Guido Steinberg with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. We've just heard there in our report this challenge for Arab countries to stay on the side of the West, even when that means supporting Israel. How much do you think that this latest Iranian attack has complicated the balancing act?
I don't think that this latest attack has complicated the balancing act. Simply because the Arab nations neighboring Israel have a lot more problems with the Israeli attacks in Gaza, with the Israeli war in Gaza against Hamas, than with with military action against Iran. They all do agree with Israel, that Iran is the greatest threat to regional security, and that is part of the reason why Jordan and Saudi Arabia and possibly the United Arab Emirates cooperated with Israel and the United States in fending off this Iranian attack last weekend.
Do we know the extent to which they were involved in fending off this latest Iranian attack?
Well, they did play a minor role, but it was important. Especially, we have seen that Jordan even shut down some of the drones flying over Jordanian territory. The role of Saudi Arabia might have been even more important, because Saudi Arabia opened up its airspace to American and possibly even Israeli fighter jets. Since 2022, some of these nations do have an agreement with Israel and the United States, although partly unofficial, about air defense. And the reason is very simple. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and even Egypt to some extent, they fear this growing strength of the Iranian missile program.
So even with that fear very much front and present, when you look at a figure like, say, Jordan's King Abdullah, you've mentioned also the strong public support within Jordan and these countries for the plight of the Palestinians, concerns about what is happening in Gaza. When you look at Jordan, how does he go about maintaining these ties with Israel and the West while also putting at ease the minds of the public about what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah, there is a major difference between Jordan and countries like Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Although the populations in all these countries are adamantly on the side of the Palestinians and partly on the side of Hamas as well, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are stable countries in full control of the situation in the country. Jordan always has to fear a major mobilization of the Palestinian population in the kingdom. But I think that might be one reason why the situation in Jordan has improved a little bit after the Iranian attacks, simply because fighting against Iran, or at least positioning the kingdom against Iran, has more support in the country than siding with Israel, although only implicitly in its fight against Hamas.
So let's turn to the big question about what an Israeli response might look like. What would a best case scenario be for the Arab countries, or a worst case in terms of what Israel decides to do?
I think that some Arab countries, especially Saudi Arabia, would welcome a limited Iranian response. They all want Iran to be reined in, if not by the United States, then by Israel. They all fear Iran a lot more than Israel. At the same time, they are very much worried about regional escalation. Saudi Arabia has once been under attack of Iranian drones in 2019, and then changed its regional policies totally. Saudi Arabia has virtually tried to steer a non-aligned course in the last 2 years. For the time being, they would like the response to be of a kind that avoids a larger regional war. But in the long run, they are all extremely anti-Iranian, and they are aware that Iran has to be reined in, especially in its ambitions to become a nuclear power.
Well, thank you so much for joining us with your analysis today. That is Guido Steinberg from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. We very much appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We want to talk more about the role of Arab nations in this conflict with Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's a former diplomat and currently Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project, which is a global policy think tank. Welcome back to DW, sir. We just saw in our report how countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia and the UAE helped Israel to fend off Iran's attack on the weekend. How unexpected was this?
Thank you so much for having me. This is really a moment where Israel can build a very strong coalition against Iran. In the last couple of years, what we have seen is really Iran expanding its influence via proxies throughout the region. Hezbollah is much bigger than it used to be. The Houthis are definitely far more active than they used to be. Iraq is essentially having a problem with domination from Tehran. Syria and the Assad regime are in the hands really at the behest of Tehran, because together with the Russians, they helped to save the country. And it has, of course, found a newfound regional power, Russia as its ally. So Iran has really been able to position itself in the region, pushing back against Western and Israeli support. So it is now a chance, because a expanded Iranian influence is not in the interest of either one of the other Arab states, neither UAE nor Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Jordan would like to see a Middle East dominated by Iran. So this is really a chance. That Jordan really defended itself and Israel wasn't all that much of a surprise, because Jordan has the second longest peace treaty after Egypt with Israel. The real surprise was Saudi Arabia to a certain extent, but discreetly over the last couple of months, whenever the Houthis tried to shoot rockets and missiles, not only at commercial shipping, but when it tried to shoot those into Israel, Saudi Arabia has been very helpful, not only in providing radar data, but also shooting down some of those rockets.
Right, and you're saying Israel is using the opportunity in the beginning of your answer to build a strong coalition against Iran. Some people are calling this a new Arab-Israel axis. Would you agree with this description by some observers?
I mean, we're not quite yet. So there is a coalition to defend against Iranian missiles already in place. But what I'm saying is this is a chance for Israel to build that coalition. But it will, of course, also depend to a certain extent on what the Israeli reaction is going to be. I don't think from an Israeli perspective there is any other choice to respond. But you have seen the numerous war cabinet meetings over hours and hours deliberating what are the options, what can be done, what would be an appropriate response that to a certain extent re-establish the deterrence that Iran is not going to attack Israel now continuously in the next couple of months, but also doesn't exacerbate the situation to the extent that we are sliding into a regional war.
And as you say, everyone is waiting to see how Israel exactly does respond. Do you think these Arab nations would help Israel again if it were to strike back against Iran and provoke another counterattack by Tehran?
I mean, helping Israel in an offensive operation, I think this is a lot to ask. Even the US government seems to have made clear that they are not going to be supportive of an Israeli airstrike on Iran itself. That doesn't extend to Israeli airstrikes on Hezbollah, which is also a clear tactical threat to Israel already in motion, because, more than 80,000 Israelis have not been living in the north of Israel since October, and the arsenal of Hezbollah is very vast. The time to warn Israelis when Hezbollah fires missiles is much shorter than it is from Iran, and Hezbollah acts at the behest of Iran. So this is one of the options, and with this option, I don't think any of the Arab states would have an issue. And looking at what happened in 2006, where Israel attacked Hezbollah in a situation where Hezbollah had taken hostages and killed them, and diminished really its infrastructure in Lebanon. Iran's reaction was simply harsh words, then they rebuilt Hezbollah afterwards. But I would assume that if the Hezbollah infrastructure, especially its missile arsenal, is significantly degraded by Israel, neither the Arab states would have a problem with it, nor would Iran necessarily react to this. And of course, if there's another airstrike of Iran on Israel, I would assume that the likelihood is very, very high that Arab states are going to again come to the aid of Israel.
I just wanted to ask you finally what you think this all means for the future of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza.
Look, we are now at a very complex situation. Really, it's three different issues that Israel has to sort out at the same time. Of course, primarily, there is still the issue that Hamas is in Gaza. And as soon as Israeli troops had withdrawn from Khan Yunis, Hamas operatives were there immediately afterwards, trying to, put their version of law and order again in place. So Hamas is not defeated in Gaza at this point. This needs to be done. Hamas cannot be allowed, after a pogrom-like terror attack, to survive as a terror concern in the Gaza Strip, not in the interest of Israel, but not in the interest of everyone else. I just remind everyone, we did arrest Hamas terrorists at the end of the year here in Germany and in the Netherlands that tried to attack Germany and European targets. Second problem, of course, is the ongoing shooting war with Hezbollah, partially on the behest of Iran, partially on its own behest. And this is a real threat to Israel on a daily basis. And the third is the strategic threat that Iran poses. So not only the threat of an Iranian aerial attack again at these proportions that we have seen down the line at the next opportunity that they get, but also their looming nuclear program.
That was Hans-Jakob Schindler with the Counter-Extremism Project. Thank you very much for your insights and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Mirzad Boroujerdi co-authored Post-Revolutionary Iran, a political handbook. He's also Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences and Education at Missouri University of Science and Technology. Welcome to DW. I'd like to pick up on a couple of thoughts you tweeted recently about this conflict. You said, Iran's unexpectedly forceful attack shows the limits of American deterrence. So two things to pick out of that. Was this attack unexpected or forceful, given that Iran telegraphed the attack in advance and used drones that took hours to arrive? And two, the limits of American deterrence is an interesting idea I'd like you to expand on. So let's start with the unexpectedness of Iran's attack.
Sure. So my sense is that, when the Israelis attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria, it was a provocative act, perhaps, intended to lure Iran into, an attack of this sort, because, they realized that the Iranians need to save face, quote unquote. And I think, what we saw was, in a way, a daring but rather ineffective attack by the Iranians that was communicated to the neighboring states, Turkey and others, that passed along the information. And of course, the amount of hours that it needed for those drones and missiles to reach the Israelis enabled them to be able to do a great job of protecting themselves and shooting down, Iran's incoming drones and missiles. So I think, the Iranians felt obligated, for domestic reasons perhaps, but also as a way of showing, reestablishing their deterrence.
Okay,
to
that's
engage
understood.
in this logic, and perhaps now.
So forceful but ineffective. Let's pick up on the other part of that tweet then, the limits of American deterrence.
Right. So President Biden famously told the Iranians, don't attack. But that wasn't sufficient to deter the Iranians from attacking, Israel for the reasons I mentioned, that they felt they had to do this thing. It also shows that, a state like Israel really still does need the deterrent factor of the United States to be able to both protect itself and deal with some of its nemesis in the region.
In your series of tweets, you also said that unless significantly challenged, Iran's influence in Middle Eastern affairs has escalated. So tell us why, and whether you think this might be something that Israel will factor into its response.
So I think, Iran is viewed by many states in the Middle East as a rather intimidating neighbor, right? Due to its size, its, military prowess, and so forth. But it's also a state that doesn't really have reliable friends. If you notice the type of actors that came and defended Iran's attack on Israel were the likes of Syria, the Taliban, and Iran's own proxy groups. And it seems that almost everybody else was basically upset, intimidated by this thing, and worried about the outcomes. For example, as you were reporting in your report right now, the Jordanians and the Saudis have very good reasons. In terms of violation of their sovereignty and aerospace, etc., but also because they realize that they want to be on the good side of the United States and Israel in the long term, and just contain a threat such as Iran as a neighboring state.
OK, so we have this forceful but ineffective attack launched by Iran against Israel, as you would see it. And we have an Iran undeterred by the fact that America is standing behind Israel's shoulder. So we're in this game of bluff and double bluff now, where Israel says, what do I do next? Where Iran has said, if you do that, we will slap you down. So who calls whose bluff next?
Right. My sense is that the same type of logic that perhaps forced the Iranians to launch the attack on Israel is now forcing the Netanyahu government to stand tall, because, for a prime minister who is also, under a lot of, criticism domestically in Israel for the handling of the Gaza war, et cetera, he feels like, he cannot be the prime minister that does not respond to Iran's attack with returning the punch. However, the question, and I think that's going to happen, but the main question at this point, in my view, is what would Iran do next? Certainly, the Iranians are not, capable of militarily standing up to Israel or prevent, an attack. But it doesn't mean that they are out of non-military options.
Okay.
For example, what if Iran really raises the ante by walking out of NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
OK, so Iran
really
has options beyond the merely military. We'll leave it there. That's very interesting. Mirzad Boroujerdi, co-author of Post-Revolutionary Iran, a Political Handbook. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.